As Trump came down with 50% tariffs on India, his administration stepped up its tirade on Russian oil imports, calling Ukraine Modi's war. Was the trade war between Delhi and Washington avoidable? And is there a diplomatic solution to the sanctions on India? Hello and welcome. I'm Suhasini Haidar and this is Worldview at the Hindu. Now, D-Day arrived this week for US sanctions on India after 25% reciprocal tariffs that came into play in early August. Another 25% penalty tariffs kicked in on many Indian goods on August the 27th. Remember, this 25% is actually for India's import of Russian oil. And that makes it the first such action by the US in 27 years. The only other times India saw such broad-based sanctions was in 1992 over India's space program with Russia, and then in 1998 over the nuclear tests. At 50%, India, along with Brazil and Lesotho, are the most highly tariffed countries now by the United States. India's tariffs make its exports really uncompetitive compared to China, Vietnam, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and other rivals, particularly in the textile industries. According to GTRI, US tariffs will hit about 66% of Indian exports to the US. So those are about $86.5 billion. So it means $60 billion in goods face 50% duty. So it's textiles, gems, shrimps that are mainly at risk, but of course textiles being a labor-intensive industry, a 43% slump in export orders are expected if this continues. In fact, you can read that GTRI report at their website. Now, in the macro picture, GDP growth could drop about 0.9%. The rupee could slip further past the 88 to a dollar mark unless the RBI steps in. Of course, the US will see some of the impacts as well. It could see a rise in inflation, finding a scarcity of orders of goods that it wanted from India. Many who thought that the US would actually hold off on this very extreme step were disappointed, and Trump advisors only upped the rhetoric against India since then. Here's Peter Navarro, US White House trade advisor first.
Everybody in America loses because of what India is doing. The consumers and businesses and everything lose, and workers lose because India's high tariffs cost us jobs and factories and income and higher wages. And then the taxpayers lose because we got to fund Modi's war, okay? The road to peace runs at least partly right through New Delhi.
War?
I mean Modi's war.
Let me ask
because the road to peace runs in part through New Delhi.
Navarro also put out a series of tweets seeming to mock Prime Minister Modi over the Russian oil imports. Then there was the White House's Economic Council Director, Kevin Hassett.
That it is a complicated relationship, that it's integrated some with the problems that we're trying to put extra pressure on Russia so that we can get a peace deal to save millions of lives, and the Indian intransigence about opening their markets to our products. And so I think that when you're looking at trade negotiations, one thing I think we've all learned is that you need to keep your eyes on the horizon and recognize that there are going to be ebbs and flows in things before we reach the final position. And if the Indians don't budge, I don't think President Trump will either.
Now, Trump did get some pushback from the US opposition. The House Foreign Affairs Committee Democrats said this on the social media channel X, questioning why only India and not China and others had been sanctioned, saying this will hurt the US as well. Now, the government in Delhi has not responded. However, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar said what the MEA said before: first, that China and others buy more oil from Russia than India does, that the European countries also continue to buy LNG and they haven't been sanctioned, that the US itself has doubled trade with Russia since Trump took over, and that in the past the US had actually told India to continue to buy Russian oil below the price cap set by the G7 in order to stabilize markets. Then the External Affairs Minister also got tough, leading to a rejoinder from the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Listen in.
If you have a problem buying oil from India, oil or refined products, don't buy it. Nobody forced you to buy it. I mean, but Europe buys, America buys. So you don't like it, don't buy it.
Not like India buying Russian oil. It should not buy from India, Mr. Secretary. Your thoughts?
Look, Maria, this is a very complicated relationship. President Trump and Prime Minister Modi have very good relationships at that level. And it's not just over the Russian oil. The Indians came in very early after Liberation Day to start negotiating on tariffs, and we still don't have a deal. I thought that we would have a deal in May, June. I thought India could be one of the earlier deals, and they've kind of tapped us along in terms of the negotiations. And then there is also the aspect of the Russian crude purchases, which they've been profiteering on. So there are many levels going on here. I do think India is the world's largest democracy. The U.S. is the world's largest economy. I think at the end of the day, we will come together. I think a lot of it by the Indians has been performative.
Clearly getting more heated. So was all of this avoidable? While the US behavior has been inexplicably harsh, there are some tough questions that need to be asked from both sides. For example, if market access to agriculture, dairy, GM foods was as important a deal breaker on both sides. And remember, here at Worldview, we've been speaking about the market access issue since day one, since February when they met. So the question, should the two sides have even launched FTA talks in February without sorting this out first? Second, could a Modi-Trump call on the subject have changed the course of the trade talks and trade deal? Many are now suggesting that Prime Minister Modi actually rebuffed a number of calls from the White House, and the one call between the two leaders on June the 17th went badly over the Operation Sindoor ceasefire claims made by Mr. Trump. Third is the obvious personal rift between the two leaders over Operation Sindoor, or over Russian oil purchases, or over trade negotiations going south. Trump, in fact, for the first time spoke this week and said that he had actually spoken to Prime Minister Modi directly on May the 10th to force a ceasefire within 5 hours. Clearly, this is something India has denied, but do both sides need to give the people more clarity on the obvious divergences in their versions? The fourth, did the Modi government's decision to cancel oil from Iran and Venezuela in 2018 on Trump's orders send out the wrong precedent for the US? In other words, if India had stood firm then, would it have been threatened today? Of course, the tariffs and the sanctions are the latest, only the latest in a series of US attacks on India, strangely just after the Trump-Modi meeting at the White House that had seen so much good cheer between them. First, there were the mass deportations of Indians, and then action against several students around the country. Then new restrictions on visas, on H-1Bs, on the duration of student visas as well. The third, Trump said he doesn't want US companies investing and manufacturing in India, direct threat to Apple over iPhones being manufactured in India. Then the US began to counter India's narrative on Operation Sindoor dozens of times, despite India's denial, saying it had mediated the ceasefire, it had used trade as a lever to avert a nuclear war and all the rest. The fifth, of course, is a sore point for India that the US has courted Pakistan's Army Chief General Asim Munir, announced energy deals with Pakistan, and then came the 50% tariff. So it came on the backs of a number of other issues for India. Are there any paths to peace at present? Let's give you 6 different scenarios that could change the course of India-US relations. One, Trump has now announced an ambassador to India, Sergio Gore. He's a White House insider and has Trump's ear, although he has been named also the special envoy for the region, which could rile India if it means he's going to make efforts to mediate with Pakistan. In Washington, S. Paul Kapoor, a scholar on India, has been named as the head of the State Department's South and Central Asia Division. The third, the US has put off its trade negotiators meetings, but if it does decide to reschedule, if it decides to take a step back, that could help a breakthrough. It's unclear also whether India will bend on Russian oil, reduce at least its intake of Russian oil. That could be another sort of peace flag between the two. A fourth path, Trump will go to the UNGA on September the 22nd. And if Modi decides to go, which at present is not scheduled, there could be a meeting between them. The fifth, Modi's visit to Japan may help pave the way for a Quad summit this year. And if Trump were then to visit India for it, some of the issues could there be resolved. Sixth, Modi's visit to China, and we spoke about this last week, photo ops with Xi and Putin may actually convince the United States to rethink the impact of antagonizing a country like India. So what's Worldview's take? The die is now cast, and neither India nor the US can go back to the negotiating table with their previous positions without a considerable loss of face. The US's actions have lost it Indian trust. This may be in the short term or the long term, but it may also force a much needed recasting of the Modi government's foreign policy thus far and reclaiming of India's strategic autonomy from all the groupings, Western and Eastern, while seeking solidarity with others in South Asia and the global South. That's all we have time for here on Worldview this week. We'll be back next week with more book recommendations as well. But from the team here, thanks for watching.